Lesha, go find the rest of the panelists. All right, meet you in the bar.
Yes.
That's too long, Tutti hanno potuto, non è buono prima di fare, ha potuto il я знаю, що я хочу, це не маю розкопу. Студенти.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this, the last session of the conference today, and this will be the youth panel. The session has been entitled The Aspirations of the Young Generation on Both Sides of the Iron Curtain. Before we actually start with the discussions themselves, I have one announcement to make, and that's that the members of the Resolutions Committee should meet just beyond the doors over there, straight away, please. Nations do not disappear because of too many heroes, but because there are no heroes. So said the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yaroslav Stechko. Youth of every era, of every generation, has lived and carried with it great ideals. Every young man or woman has wanted to change the world, to make it into a just society, and indeed make it a better place in which to live. But these ideals, these hopes and dreams are shuffled and lost in pessimism or apathy. Gone are the loyalties to one's God, one's country, to a life of valued tradition. Instead, we have a loyalty to a materialistic gain, an egoism to benefit oneself and no one else, and apathy to hedonism. The young representatives here on this panel today appeal to our peers to work for the benefit of our societies and the common good of all mankind. We have responsibilities not only to our captured brothers, but to our own conscience. We must pursue nationalism and the process of liberation. We must renew our faith in God and ensure that all may enjoy religious freedom. We must share and endeavour to maintain our individual culture and heritage so that it may flourish. We must pursue the ideas of ABN and the European Freedom Council and organisations like them, which propagate freedom for nations as an alternative to an atomic war. We must first read ourselves and then spread the literary works of our imprisoned brethren, for they show us the truth of life behind the Iron Curtain. We must emphasise in the West that the aim of Moscow is world domination, and the West's empathy lies with the captive nations, for they were once free and now find themselves in chains. It is our responsibility to warn our youth that although no bombs have yet been dropped and no gunfire has been heard, a war has been waged. A psychological war against the democratic process, against what is constitutionally guaranteed every citizen of a free and democratic Western society. It is our duty and moral obligation to defend our rights and those taken away from our enslaved brethren. We have in the panel today representatives of the youth of many nations, and before asking the first of them to speak, there are two amendments to the list of speakers given in the programme. Firstly, the third speaker, Mr. Juan Clark, is unfortunately unable to be with us, but there are two additions to the programme. Unfortunately, they were omitted from the published programme. They are Mr. Ante Kokic, a Croatian youth representative, and Mr. Imants Liegis of Latvia. The first of the panellists this evening is Miss Irena Chalupa, who is going to speak on Between Two Currents, being Ukrainian in America. She was from New York originally and currently lives in Munich, working for the central headquarters of the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, you will have to pardon my nasal twang. Between the Arctic frost of Munich and this seductive mist of London, I've accumulated a very bad cold. So my voice usually sounds much better than it is today, so just bear with me. Now, on to my pearls of wisdom. America has often been called a melting pot of many nations. For me, the term carries many implications, for the most part negative. It makes America sound like some sort of kitchen fixture. You throw assorted ingredients into it, and presto, out comes a homogeneous mass. All the ingredients used have lost their shape and color. They've lost their individuality and uniqueness. They are now a part of a nondescript whole. The positive aspects of the melting pot concept, on the other hand, imply that in America, people of many different cultures can find refuge, freedom, and peace, the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. When I became an American citizen, I swore allegiance to that country. I was given a small American flag, a copy of the Bill of Rights, and together with some 100 other persons being naturalized that day, recited the Pledge of Allegiance. I waited 15 years to become an American citizen. You may well wonder why, as one can apply for citizenship after 3 years' residence in America. I waited 15 years to become an American citizen because I viewed naturalization as the final step in a process of assimilation which began the day that I set foot on American soil. I waited 15 years because I feared becoming a part of that homogeneous mass that the melting pot yields. I have enjoyed American citizenship for 2 years now. Citizenship and all the things that are a part of it. The first thing I did after being naturalized was register to vote. I wanted to put into practice all the things my citizenship guaranteed. The first time I voted was a moment I remember vividly. I felt part of a great democratic process. It was exciting. It was exciting exercising my constitutionally guaranteed freedom of choice. My vote counted. I was contributing to the collective decision of representation. I was part of a free election process, something my Ukrainian brothers and sisters have only heard or read about behind the Iron Curtain. Being a Ukrainian living in America, I am trapped between two currents. At the risk of oversimplifying the issue, I have often felt that I am sailing down the river with two strong opposing currents pulling the boat in opposite directions. I must exercise great skill at steering the boat. The currents are so strong they can easily capsize the boat and I will drown. Being Ukrainian in America, I am free to be exactly that, Ukrainian. I am free to speak my language, practice my religion, cultivate my culture. I am free to do all those things that Ukrainians are not free to do in Ukraine. However, we Ukrainians who live outside of Ukraine are prey to a process which very subtly takes all those freedoms and changes them into something that too often stops being Ukrainian. That process is assimilation. Assimilation asserts itself in a myriad of ways and levels. In assimilating, we give a part of ourselves up. We lose something vital that cannot be reclaimed. Living in countries other than our native land, we naturally must adapt ourselves to the cultures that have given us refuge. We take on the appropriate garb to fit in. There's nothing wrong with adaptation to a point. That is the nature of the beast. It is only fitting that we become productive citizens of societies that have given us a home, but not at the expense of losing our national heritage. Assimilation in the free world is a distant, wealthier, more luxurious cousin of Russification. In Ukraine, Ukrainians are forced to speak Russian. Their culture and history are being taken away from them forcibly. They are being rewritten to be Russian. Ukraine, its culture, people and land are being raped by the Russian occupants every day. Russification is a violent, ruthless process. Assimilation is a subtle, seductive process. They both produce the same result. Our Ukrainian souls are taken away from us. They yield the same end product. We stop being Ukrainian. There is something in me that is alive and burning, and will remain so no matter what, no matter where I live. For lack of a better term, I will call this nebulous force my Ukrainian soul. It has always been there, vibrant and strong, underneath all the many layers that are the product of socialization. It is this force that keeps all of us going. It is this national soul that has brought all of us here today to this conference. It is this national soul that keeps us fighting against the Russian monster that is trying with all his might to wrench it out of us and replace it with a void. Inside of me there is a part of Ukraine, as inside each of you is a part of your native land. It is this force that has taught myself and my Ukrainian friends in America to live between the two currents. It is this force that allows us to be both Ukrainian and American, spiritually and pragmatically. Over the years we have learned that being Ukrainian and being American are not mutually exclusive. We can do both, and the Ukrainian self need not suffer at the expense of the American. It is not a simple formula. There is no simple and ready recipe, and we don't know what the ramifications of such a life can be. It is obvious, however, that the two can often make up a richer, stronger, more stable one. America benefits from the wealth of the many cultures who make up its population. America benefits from its citizens who are Ukrainian. It has given us a home away from home. It has given us opportunity. It has given us sanctuary. Ukrainians who live in America have given America a great deal. They are citizens who deeply value the democratic process, who value their freedom because we know that our country is not free, our loved ones are not free. Our Ukrainian brothers and sisters are in chains. Every day the shackles tighten. We do not take our freedom for granted, as too many people in the West do. It is the freedom we have in America that allows us to openly proclaim Russian imperialism an enemy of all mankind, to educate the world of the plight of our enslaved nations. It is this freedom that allows us to do everything we can for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that extremely interesting discussion on the problems of assimilation in a foreign country other than your native one. It's a problem, although dealt with there in respect of a Ukrainian living in America, it's equally true of all those other countries in the world, equally true of those people who live elsewhere, be it in America, Britain, or elsewhere throughout Europe. The next speaker is Major Tran Chow Thuy. He's a former pilot and chief operations officer of the 3rd Division of the Vietnamese Air Force, who spent 5 years in prison after the communist invasion. He's vice chairman of the European Vietnam Veterans and a member of the Young Vietnamese for Freedom, and lives in Brussels.
Votre Excellence, Président Wilkinson, Président Stexco, le général Stenko et tous les membres de la délégation. Pour faciliter et comprendre tout ce que je vais vous expliquer, je crois que j'ai besoin d'un traducteur.
The speech will actually be read to you by Trong Am Chow, who's from the United States, from New York, and is attending her 4th conference already in a very short space of time.
D'abord, je vous souhaite de bonne santé et plein d'énergie pour lutter contre le communisme en ayant l'intention de conquérir tout le monde entier.
First of all, I wish you good health and much energy in your struggle against communism, which wants to conquer the whole world.
Je crois que tout le monde a entendu le mot rééducation, mais vous ne vous rendez pas compte tout ce qui s'est passé dans le camp de rééducation, où nous sommes les victimes du communisme qui m'a détenu à peu près 4 ans.
All of you have suddenly heard the word re-education, but nobody really knows what it means, a re-education camp in communist Vietnam. I spent 4 years in those camps.
En effet, je voudrais vous expliquer quelques problèmes, quelques drames relatifs dans le camp de rééducation.
I would like to explain you some problems regarding those re-education camps.
Le premier jour, je suis rentré dans le camp de rééducation. Le communisme m'a enlevé tout de suite 2, 3. Le premier, c'est 3 de possession, et le deuxième, c'est 3 de civique.
On the first day, I entered into that re-education camp. The communist guards took me up 2 rights. The right to possess anything, and second, the right, or any civic right.
Je vais vous expliquer qu'est-ce que c'est le droit de possession et le droit de civique. On m'a confisqué tout de suite ma montre, mes lunettes et une paire de chaussures. Voilà le poids de vos sessions que j'ai pas le droit de porter toutes les choses là. Et après déclaration de curriculum vitae, on m'a affirmé que dès maintenant, je n'ai plus le droit de civique, mais on n'a rien dit que je suis un prisonnier. Là, c'est un jeu de mots. C'est parce que vous savez bien, si je suis un prisonnier, il faut me condamner 5 ans, ou bien 6 ans réclusion, ou bien même condamné à mort. Mais le camp de rééducation, on ne sait pas à quelle date, ou bien à 15 jours, on va me libérer. Là, c'est un jeu de mots d'aller dessus. Et je vous donne.
On the first day, I took me my shoes, my watch, and everything I had. In fact, I was not really a prisoner because being a prisoner, you have to be condemned, and you know how many years you will spend there. So there is some unusual situation in those camps where you are not really prisoners, but you can get out of it.
Et tous les prisonniers doivent travailler des travaux forcés, mais très inhumains. Par exemple, les prisonniers doivent enlever tous les mines pendant la guerre qu'on a installées pour protéger la base ou bien le poste. Mais pour enlever les mines, normalement, il y a un spécialiste qui doit enlever, ou bien il y a des gens qui travaillent dans le service génie militaire. Mais comme nous, ce sont des officiers dans l'armée de l'air, et tout le monde doit travailler quand même. Dans cette opération, à peu près 15 prisonniers sont morts.
You have to work the whole day. And for instance, you have to take off mines. On the first day, we had to do this work, not being specialists. We have lost 15 persons.
Et pendant 5 ans dans la prison, ma femme est venue 2 fois. Et chaque fois, 1 heure pour me rendre visite, avec 3 kilos de provisions, y compris médicaments. Mais les médicaments, je n'ai pas le droit de les garder.
During the 4 years, I just received twice a visit of my wife, who had the right to give me 3 kilograms in a package, including medicines. But I didn't have the right to use those medicines.
Et tous les jours, chaque prisonnier a reçu 2 poignées de riz. Mais imaginez-vous, ce n'est pas du riz que votre gentille épouse qui a préparé pour vous. Ce sont des riz pourris. Et en plus, quelques morceaux de sein tout noirs pour réserver pour les animaux. Et même il y a des vers, des petits insectes dans le riz aussi.
As food, we have received just 2 handfuls of rice with some sugar and salt per day.
Normalement, chaque jour, je me souviens, j'ai reçu au minimum 2-3 coups de biais ou de poing. I got every day, I think so about 3-4 times the bunch, I think. Je crois que le temps ne permet pas de vous expliquer autre chose, mais je vous promets, si vous avez besoin des documents, ou bien vous avez des questions, je vais vous expliquer après. À suite de mes explications, ma compatriote, je vais vous expliquer, je vais vous lire un texte concernant l'aspiration de la jeunesse sur les 2 côtés, après le rideau du fer du communisme. Et je vous remercie infiniment de votre attention.
If you need some more information regarding those camps in Vietnam, I will be very glad to furnish them to you. And even if you want to put up some questions, I will be very glad to answer to you.
and Friends of Freedom Fighter. I'm the interpreter for a speech that he wrote, but in French. So I'm reading it in English, okay? Excuse me if I pronounce some words not perfectly clear, but because this is my first time, so you have to, you know, a little break. Okay. There's much irony in my topic. We know we all share this. We know we all share a single planet, no matter which country we come from. We are a single human race, no matter what we look like or no matter which language we speak. But since an Iron Curtain was dropped across the face of Europe and also around several other countries, effectively condemning off entire populations, it is as if two worlds, two separate political and social cultures have sprung into life in this world. Life for today's young people behind the Iron Curtain is little different than that portrayed in George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm. Unless you were privileged to be born into a family of a successful commissar or military officers, much like the offspring of royalty in the past centuries, your life would be one uninterrupted series of surrenders of your very humanity, because escape to freedom is usually unimaginable and unobtainable. You will in time accept the indignity of having very little control over your own life. You will go through the perfunctory schooling, murdering empty slogans and jargon. You will attend the boring political seminars to avoid punishment. You will probably spend more time in the armed forces, possibly even being shipped off to fight, quote, imperialist reactionaries, unquote. You will work in some factory or office with no incentive to perform or to achieve anything useful. You will marry, have children, and live in impossibly overcrowded conditions with little or no privacy. You will read, listen to, watch, and even eventually think what the party wants you to. You will turn bitter, cynical, uncaring, indifferent, perhaps even turn to alcohol. Perhaps in your youth you nourished dreams about what you would become when you grow up. Perhaps you dream about things one day you might have, like a nice home, a nice car, furniture, good clothing, stereo equipment. Perhaps in your dreams of traveling, perhaps you dream of traveling, of going to great concerts, or of becoming someone great in art, music, literature, or sport. But except for the smallest number of people in your generation, and usually those belonging to the families of the nomenclatura, few, if any, of your dreams will be realized. You learn occasionally or obtain glimpses of what your generation on the other side of the Iron Curtain are doing and dreaming of. In the West, in the free countries of the world, youth share your dreams as well. They want the same things you want. The difference is they can obtain what they want, and you are not allowed to. The youth of freedom, through schooling, through hard work, can usually obtain whatever he wants or become whatever he wants. It is freedom that permits this. You know that. What you can't understand is, however, is why the youth on the free side of the Iron Curtain are always dissatisfied with life. It is a real puzzle. Why are they so angry at their elders and at their government leaders? Why do they keep demanding perfection when they already possess the greatest amount of freedom ever known to mankind? Why do they always protest and demonstrate about the slightest imperfection in their societies instead of being grateful for the freedom and democracy they already enjoy? who do so many of their idealistic young people see the likes of Ho Chi Minh, Muammar Gaddafi, Mao Zedong, Ayatollah Khomeini, Fidel Castro, Daniel Ortega, Karl Marx, and Vladimir Lenin as their spiritual heroes? Why do so many of them rebel against their parents and school? Why so many of them on drugs and alcohol? The true aspiration of the youth on the dark side of the Iron Curtain is to one day taste freedom. The aspiration of most youth on the bright side of the curtain is total absorption in one's own selfish desire, without a thought given to the heavy price paid to protect the freedom to be so wanton and so self-indulgent. Of course, there are pockets of youth in the free world who understand the lesson freedom imposes. Every generation brings forth youth who appreciate what it is to be free and who will sacrifice for it so that others may remain free. Sadly, however, their numbers are usually eclipsed by those who either think little about freedom or those who are only too anxious to see freedom perish. One is reminded of the countless number of people who cheered on Adolf Hitler as he rose to the power. To all those who early sided with Lenin and Stalin until they were brought before firing squad. And to all those who found it so easy to criticize the free government of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, until the heirs of Ho Chi Minh ushered into a new era, where the quiet resembles the stillness of a cemetery. So to return to our young protege behind the Iron Curtain, who wonders if anybody his age on the other side cares anymore. Surely he realizes if no one on the other side cares about freedom, then not only will despotism continue to rule his own bleak life, but inevitably freedom will perish on the other side as well. Perhaps a trade could be arranged. Why not let him and his freedom-thirsty companion emigrate to the free countries, to the other side of the Iron Curtain, and allow those jaded dandies and those nopats over here, over the free countries, come over behind the Iron Curtain and take his place. Wouldn't that be fair? What could be fair? Thank you.
Thank you for that very heartfelt contribution, and that was a contribution not based on theory or speculation, but on first-hand experience. You certainly do know the value of freedom and know that none of us must ever take our freedom for granted. Our next speaker is Lieutenant Ha Diep, former lieutenant in the Vietnamese army who was wounded in Vietnam, and is currently chairman of the Toronto chapter of the Young Vietnamese for Freedom. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is George Steckel, the Vice President of ABM, Honorable Wilkinson, President of European Freedom Council, ladies and gentlemen. Once again in this conference you hear twice about the Vietnamese situation and twice about the Vietnam war and under the communist regime. I would like not to talk about Vietnam because in this conference there are a lot of countries subjugated by the communist Russia, not only Vietnam. And talking about young generation inside of Vietnam, And we're talking about other young generation inside other subjugate countries. So there is no interest in talking about that topic. But I would like to tell you a story of the Vietnamese family. And I do believe who have lost family once, who have lost freedom once, who have lost their country once, can understand and empathize what I'm talking. Mr. Thong, he had one family, 3 children. After the communist took over the South Vietnam, the communist withdraw his citizenship, and he is no longer the Vietnamese citizen. That is the communist policy. And I do believe, and my understanding experience, that national policy imposed upon any citizen in any subjugate nation all around the world. When he cannot have anything to survive for his family, he decided to get away from this regime. One day, a 3-year-old boy asked him, before he left Vietnam, that when I can see you again. He cannot answer this question. But he left Vietnam in a small boat in the ocean. The boat sunk down the ocean. He was killed by the pirate. The young kid, the 3-year-old boy, never see the father again. I believe this story never moved our heart. The people who have experience in the communist regime. What I'm talking about the story is just to remind you to understand when we are outside the country, subjugated by the communists, stay here, talking conference, filibuster, and never have one gun, one bomb to destroy the communist regime. I refer this real story to you as a symbolic story of our generation inside the subjugate nation all over the world. When the boat of the Vietnam sinking down in the ocean, at that time the generation inside Vietnam sinking down in the vast ocean of the evil empire of Soviet Russia. If we are only talking about the negative aspect of the young generation inside subjugate nation, I do believe it's unfair. We have another side, another aspect that positive, that help me, that help you, that help us to strong, to stand, to fight continually in this world against the evil empire. There are 3 proposals that I would like to refer to the ABN, to the World Anti-Communist League, the EFC, European Freedom Council. The first proposal the one for ABN and EFC should organize, and my best understand, in one unique body internationally to finance for the political institutes in which we can train the young people outside the subjugate nation, have a lot of understanding, knowledge about the communism, equip them enough, weapon them enough for them to have a chance in the future to come back inside the subjugate nation to raise the fight of the freedom. That's the first. The second, to increase the lobbies and the connection with the House of the Commons, with the Parliament everywhere, every government that we are living, to press down the public opinion, follow the views that we want, and the way the communists have done. ABM and WANCO and European Freedom Council should finance any young people who have enough equipment, understanding, training, by any means, at any cost, send them back to the subjugate nation where they were from and let them set a fight in which we can start fighting right inside of the communist evil empire. It may be ridiculous today what I say, but I believe there's no other means that we can win communists if we are not inside communists to fight. The third, ABM, OneCo, and EFC must be the connection between all the freedom councils, all the freedom fighters all around the world. They should become the governing body that can help and support morally, spiritually, physically, and commit themselves to the freedom fighter everywhere around the world, realistically. They must become the real life for the fun battle life of the freedom fighter. In conclusion, I will just say that human beings are very simple. Human beings, we are very simple to live, very simple to enjoy the life, very simple to recognize the universal justice and to maintain it. We are simple to fight for the family life and for the freedom that we lost. And we're simple to struggle for the freedom that we never had in the subjugate nation. Can we have all of us today in this conference, all of us, the freedom fighters around the world? Can we have a dream of someday we can come back our nation that a long time we have left, a long time we have dreamed, a long time we have thought. Someday we come back and the flower blooming along the street side and welcome back our freedom fighter right in our country. There are many manifestations, many demonstrations of our freedom fighting. But one way that I consider, and I believe from experience, that's the best way to use a weapon, use everything that can destroy the communists, but physically first, before we can come in spiritually. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution. No doubt the proposals for the future activities of both the ABN and the FC are proposals which will be considered by the governing bodies of both of those organisations. Turning now to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Miss Larissa Figol, who will speak on the religious and spiritual renaissance amongst the young generation behind the Iron Curtain. Ms. Figol is a Ukrainian student living in Toronto, Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Honorable John Wilkinson, Honorable Yaroslav Stichkova, fellow panelists, honored delegates for this REFC-ABN conference, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen. One of the panelists speaking later on, Mr. Olescu, will be speaking of the millennium of Christianization, a crucial event in the liberation process. Much of his discussion here on this panel must include the vibrant religious renaissance of which I am to speak of. So with your indulgence, Mr. Moderator, allow me to broaden the topic of my theme to include a nationalistic renaissance as well. Youth today is in captivity. In the West, the youth is caught in bonds of passivity and apathy. Many of my generation have become materialistic, choosing affluence and security and social status over denunciation and commitment to battle a totalitarian communist regime, thus working for independence and freedom of others. This can be moderately compared to Western governments who will not denounce horrendous abuse of human rights and persecution of religious freedom for the fear of hurting détente. This is a psychological captivity. Youth behind the Iron Curtain is in a physical state of captivity. Rights are denied and individuals are persecuted for freedoms which we here in the West enjoy as common day practice, freedoms such as that of the press and speech. A university peer of mine told me not too long ago of a visit of his to Ukraine. There he spoke to another student who answered a question put forth to him like this: The question was, "If you could, in a few short words, describe your life here," he replied, "My life here is all right, I eat bread daily, but my biggest dilemma is that living in an occupied nation, I have great guilt burning at my face that daily I am always serving my enemy." It is feelings such as these which in many cases make one stop and think, why am I serving my enemy? From this arises the nationalistic and religious spirit of which I would like to speak of today. The urge and need to free oneself from captive bonds becomes of the uttermost importance. This nationalistic and religious renaissance grows daily, although not expressed as vocally as one would like. Our youth, our students are not dormant despite obvious internal, political, and social attempts by Moscow to stomp them. For example, a few years back, First Secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine, Szczerbetsky, was traveling from Ternopil to Lviv, a distance of about 120 kilometers. Along the route, numerous blue and yellow Ukrainian flags were hung. This may seem like a trivial act to some, but imagine the amount of work and ingenuity needed for a task such as this. Hundreds of yards of material would need to be obtained, hours of labor in sewing them by women and their mothers, young women and their mothers, and to cover a distance of 120 kilometers to hang these flags is a miraculous task. This is but a paragraph from an epic book that could describe this wondrous renaissance of nationalistic spirit. Yet Moscow hammers and hammers at these monumental labors of freedom. Countless young men and women are arrested under charges of laziness, hooliganism, and destroying public property. This is done not only to curb the liberation process, but to create among the masses a strong hate for it, and thus dissipating it. The hate is created elsewhere as well, in the educational system of our homelands. One of the greatest influences and most dangerous is the academic sector. University professors have one of the greatest influences on the minds of our students. If these professors teach a blasphemized truth dictated by the Communist Party, how can a young woman of, say, the age of 18, 19, or 20 develop this imperative nationalistic spirit? The way to do it is through the resistant movements, which exist behind the Iron Curtain and have not withered away and died, but instead have been rejuvenated and reborn. These academics have tried and in many ways are succeeding in spreading their tyranny throughout the Western world. The work that you and I do through organized bodies such as ABN and EFC, and the lobbying we do of our politicians to put pressure on communist governments in question, is extremely beneficial to upkeeping the national and spiritual morale of our enslaved nations. To turn away any opposing thoughts to communism and imperialism by academics here in the West would be a great victory for Soviet Russia. Reputable institutions such as Harvard and the Chair of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Toronto are under constant extreme pressure to organize lecture exchanges. In September of this year, a host of university academics traveled to Canada from the University of Chernivtsi to speak on, and I quote, Ukrainian immigration to Canada of youth from both sides of the ocean. Ironically, one of these scholars, Yuri Makar, is a historian specializing in the Communist Party. He is highly suspected of holding the rank of colonel in the same party. Let me relate a direct incident of brutal intentions by the KGB to break the academic spirit we have here. A professor at York University in Toronto was telephoned by a man named Ivan Ivanovich from the Soviet Russian Embassy in Ottawa, wanting to meet with him to ask this professor to appear in Lviv with a lecture or presentation. The professor said he couldn't go because he had no guarantee if he would be allowed to return home. Ivan Ivanovich gave him the guarantee that no harm would come to him. So he traveled to Lviv, presented his lecture, then asked the officials who so cordially took care of him if he could visit some family who lived nearby. They said, of course, and asked for their names. He gave the name of a girl and a man named Matvienko. The official returned the next day and said that a visit with the girl could be arranged, but naming various excuses, the man Matvienko could not be visited. They gave him a chauffeur and a translator. He objected to the translator, pointing out, and with good reason, that if he could deliver a lecture at the university in Lviv, why couldn't he speak to his cousin in Ukrainian as well? The official insisted on the translator, and off they went. In the salon or town where the cousin lived, the translator roamed through all the rooms of the house, then promptly left, saying he would return in 1 hour. The visit went well, but a few days later this professor found out that his cousin, the man named Matvienko, died of unknown causes. The professor, always an outspoken man, fears for the safety of his family now. How often will he speak out against Russian bloodbaths now? There is a similar persecution of faith in our countries, behind the Iron Curtain, but with a renaissance in nationalism, a renaissance of spiritualism occurs. One's faith and liberation comes from a strong belief in one's own identity and existence. For this, he or she turns to the church or one's individual religious belief. Despite Moscow's efforts to close down churches, or interestingly enough, paint them over because they have a Banderite or a revolutionary look about them, many marriages are being performed and their children are baptized in the Orthodox or Catholic faith. This is being conducted by priests who have studied in secluded seminaries and now execute all religious ceremonies. Students gather and commemorate religious holidays, knowing full well what penalty lies for them if they are caught. Joseph Karela says it best. For us, an ethical moral society is our church, and it is therefore not strange that the authorities persecute the Ukrainian Catholics with such severity. We must remember that the strength of a people lies in its mass, not in its territory. But this mass must be healthy, not denationalized, and lacking its own desire for life. Today we are divided between different nations, and each one of them gives us good fortune only if it wishes to. Let us remember that not one of the occupant nations will give us any freedom, any moral correction, for to them we are worse than slaves. Therefore only we must carry through the reform, only we. The time has come to see the light, and not sparing our strength, to arise for the sacred right to live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We in the West always complain about the left-wing propaganda directed at the young in the West. But that is as nothing as compared with the propaganda to which the youth behind the Iron Curtain is subjected. Yet still they retain their national and their religious ideals. Indeed, as we've heard, both national and religious ideals are undergoing a renaissance. In that we can certainly find much to be hopeful about for the future. Our next speaker will be dealing with the topic, the crime of being Ukrainian in Ukraine, and that is Miss Irina Kapustinska, who, having lived in London, now works in Munich for the central office of the ABN. Irina.
How good it is that I do not fear death, and do not question the burden of my cross, that I do not bow to you, malicious judges, in a foreboding of unknown destinations. My people, I shall return to you, and in death I will turn to life. In my suffering and without an unkind face, I will bow before you like a son, and deeply look into your honest eyes, and with my native land will unite as one. These words, expressing a love for one's country and contempt of one's oppressors, were written by the late Ukrainian poet Vasil Stus, the most recent victim of Russian terror and oppression, who died on September the 4th, 1985, in the Russian concentration camp in Perm, due to medical neglect. Vasil Stus was regarded by the Russian authorities as a criminal, a danger to the so-called Soviet state. So he was eliminated. Stus is one of many of so-called criminals. Since 1984, other Ukrainian activists, such as Oleg Satyki, Valery Marchenko, Yuri Litvin, Alexei Nikitin, have been murdered or driven to suicide at the hands of the KGB in either prisons or concentration camps. Their crimes? The struggle for freedom, Christian faith, human rights, and independence. Their lives, as well as the lives of countless of other fighters for freedom, beginning from members of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army and the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, to the writers of the 60s, and finally the political and cultural activists of the 70s and 80s, passed in accordance with the same immovable and stricken scheme, which is designated for all those people who dared to raise their voices against the arbitrary Russian communist regime, against the subordination of education with political and ideological aims, against contempt of national, human and political rights of the individual and nations in the USSR, all of which result in the following: expulsion from the Communist Party, loss of work, police searches of one's home, arrests and interrogations, fabrication of the trial accusation, a closed trial, sentence, penal camp or prison, deportation, exile, and finally death. Why is it that to be Ukrainian in Ukraine is a crime? In my opinion, the answer lies in the definition of Russian values, the values of the occupier on the one hand, and Ukrainian values, the values of the occupied on the other. Russian values, that is, the values of Moscow, stand for philosophical and dialectical materialism, Bolshevism being the synthesis of Russian communism and imperialism. The aims of Russian imperialism are world conquest and the creation of one universal Russian communist empire. This imperialist idea is not new to the Russians. In the past, Pan-Slavism was also a Russian notion. In contrast, Ukraine has national ideals. That is, a national state as opposed to the imperialist state. Ukrainians have never attempted to conquer foreign lands, but have always been forced to fight for the re-establishment of their own national state. Therefore, to the Russians, someone who struggles for the independent national state is a criminal, a bourgeois nationalist. The Russians have always imposed the Russian Orthodox religion in all the countries they have occupied. The Ukrainian Catholic and Orthodox churches were liquidated in Ukraine. Churches are being constantly destroyed. All churches in Ukraine were to be under the jurisdiction of the Russian Patriarch. In this way, Moscow became the center of Russian Orthodoxy as well as of Russian imperialism. However, as communism is an atheist doctrine, the Russians have exploited orthodoxy in order to expand the Russian Empire with the help of those who still believe in God. Ukrainians, on the other hand, are the bearers of Christian ideals, whereas the Russian communists are the bearers of warring atheism. As I have already mentioned, both Ukrainian churches, the Catholic and the Orthodox, were forcibly incorporated into the Russian Orthodox Church. To continue its existence, the Ukrainian Church was forced to go underground. That the Ukrainian Church still exists and is active can be seen in the latest underground documents of the Chronicle of the Catholic Church in Ukraine, which have recently appeared in the West. To believe in God follows one religious faith, results in persecution by the KGB and long terms of imprisonment. This is a criminal act too. The Russians wish to create one Soviet nation, a Soviet people, which is to comprise of all the nations they presently occupy. This Soviet nation will result in the mixing of all nations, all lifestyles, their histories, cultures, traditions, languages, into one nation which will end up as nothing more than a Russian supernation. Ukrainian national culture stands in opposition to the Bolshevik Russian anti-culture. Anti-culture here meaning a culture opposing all national and individual cultures. Ukrainian culture is a culture of individuality, pride, dignity, whereas Soviet culture is that of an anonymous mass, the intermixing of all individual national cultures. This Russian Bolshevik anti-culture destroys the mosaic of national cultures, on which alone a world culture can be created. For example, had Goethe not been created in the German spirit, or Shakespeare in the English spirit, or Shevchenko in the Ukrainian spirit, then they would not have had much significance in the mosaic of world cultures. The aim of the Soviet Russians today is to mix together all national and cultural figures, writers, poets, playwrights, artists, and force them to produce works on the great Russian nation. and social realism. In such a way, they will be cultivating the oppressor and drawing away from their own spiritual and national roots. Their own individual creativity is stifled and ends up being very shallow. For example, Olis Honchar, a Ukrainian writer who was a communist in the 1960s, by writing his book Sobor, the Cathedral, went too far in expressing his Ukrainian spirituality. After the publication of his book, he was expelled from the Ukrainian Writers' Union in Ukraine. The same applies to Vasil Stus, Lina Kostenko, Alla Horitska, Evgen Sverschuk, Irena Senik, and many others who, for showing the